This is the Devil's Guide to D&D. Devil's Delegate here, and this is part 3 of Origin Spells for Sorcery Subclasses, which is funny as I thought I was done with that. There were 5 subclasses without spells, and I covered 5 subclasses. But there's Unearthed Arcana subclasses, ones that didn't make the grade, and people do play those. So don't those deserve some attention? I suppose. But what really sparked my interest was 2 of those classes start from a similar place, and how in adding spells we can get an idea of what makes for a well-designed subclass versus a poor one, and how this is not just a matter of combat effectiveness. Also, we end up with one really cool subclass. So I'll briefly cover and add spells to Stone Sorcery and Sea Sorcery, and even more briefly cover Giant Soul. But mainly I'm here to compare the Pyromancer to the Phoenix Soul, the 2 fire-based origins. This is not a Fix the Subclasses video, though I may touch on a few items. Again, this all started with my video on the Clockwork Soul and Aberrant Mind origins from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and how WotC added 10 spells to each of those, giving them not only greater versatility when compared to previous origins, but giving the sorcerer an identity with the ability to cast its origin spells with sorcery points, and when doing so, to ignore components. This means that the older subclasses also need 10 origin spells, which has always been the view held by many, but is rapidly becoming the majority position. And I would say they also need the ability to cast those 10 without components. Check out my previous videos. I'll put a link in the description. So now I'll add spells to the origins that didn't make it out of playtesting. And I'll start with Pyromancy, which makes a lie out of everything I just said, because it wasn't published in Unearthed Arcana, nor did it go through normal playtesting. It was designed almost as a throwaway, as part of a Magic the Gathering Dungeons & Dragons crossover called Planeshift Kaladesh, a free downloadable document that was more about advertising an art book than making characters. In describing how you can use the Magic the Gathering setting for your game, the Pyromancy origin was listed at the end of a paragraph, with surprisingly little description. It's just about folks who are really into fire, and the features double down on that. 4 features that only do fire things. When you do fire, you do more fire. You resist and then are immune to fire. You ignore others' resistance and then immunity to fire. And if someone attacks, you do more fire. Well, it has the benefit of purity. There's nothing else here. At all. There's no themes beyond fire, and there's no tricky uses of fire. The Kaladesh setting involves magical machines, creatures created as a byproduct of purifying magical energy, a conflict between bureaucrats and rebels. Absolutely none of which makes it into the subclass. It's just about hitting things with fire. I never thought of the Red Dragon Sorcerer as the height of complexity and depth, but comparing these 2 is like comparing a stick figure to Picasso. Pyromancy also isn't an effective subclass, as it never adds damage to the main target of spells, and requires a sorcerer to be hanging out close to melee, without granting anything that would make it less squishy. But on the positive side, it doesn't have any of the weird gaping holes some of the Unearthed Arcana origins have, though all of them are more interesting. So, 10 spells for this subclass. Sure. All there is to work with is the words fire and flame, and doing damage when possible. Here. I've included a cantrip. Burning Hands, Hellish Rebuke, Produce Flame, Agonizer's Scorcher, Flaming Sphere, Fireball, Melf's Minute Meteors, Fire Shield, Wall of Fire, Flame Strike, Immolation. I can't say these do much of anything to flavor the Pyromancer. It had only one flavor. Casting these with sorcery points, and without components, does drive home that is the character who is filled with fire and not just an area of learning, but otherwise there's nothing here. This is a terrible subclass, not just because it isn't effective. There are worse official subclasses for other classes, but because it is so simple and so boring. Now let's consider Phoenix Sorcery. The description is a great deal more elaborate and flavorful. The Phoenix Sorcerer is obsessed by flame, though that doesn't make him a pyromaniac, nor is he protected from it. And it isn't about doing damage, just about flame. He's also reckless. His fiery power comes from the phoenix, thus flight and wind and feathers. Okay. But also rebirth. He doesn't avoid damage, but instead dies and comes back. This is something I can work with. But what about the mechanics? The Mantle of Flame feature is about being fiery and doing fire damage. But the 6th level feature, Phoenix Spark, brings the sorcerer back if he is reduced to 0 hit points. So rebirth is part of the mechanics. After that, we have regaining hit points and flight. Now I can work with all that. Of note, the class does need some revision to make it viable, but that's easy, as playtesters have said pretty much the same thing over and over. The Mantle of Flame feature, which is the key one for being effective, is set to be only usable once per long rest, and that needs to be greatly increased. To go with current standards, just change that to proficiency bonus times per long rest, and the subclass would be playable. But I can make it better than playable by adding origin spells. Like the Pyromancer, there should be fire-based. We've also got death and rebirth to work with, as well as Phoenix Rising kind of things. So a nice 50-50 split. So at first level, the Devil gives Burning Hands, Featherfall, Control Flames. Burning Hands is the default first level fire spell, the one that doesn't step on the toes of fiends. Featherfall, because phoenixes don't plummet. And the cantrip Control Flames is there purely for style. And it's particularly good because the subclass can already start little fires with a feature. These are all spells from the Sorcerer's list, but we'll diverge from that at level 3 with Continual Flame, Gentle Repose. And I love those for giving the subclass a real feel all its own. Why Continual Flame when there are multiple second-level fire attack spells? Well, Agonazar's Scorcher, however you pronounce that, Flaming Sphere, Pyrotechnics, and Scorching Ray are all sorcery spells that he can still choose. I'll make a separate video on why Continual Flame is one of the greatest spells in the game, but just focusing on our Phoenix Sorcerer, he's obsessed with flame. Well, now he can keep one and gaze into it without fear of burning down anything. He can cast it on his gloves and have perpetually fiery hands. He can cast it on a hairpin and have a flame rising from his head. He can cast it on his dagger, his fillings, a false eye. Then Gentle Repose brings out the connection with death and rebirth. There's always time to be reborn. Later. At 5th level, Fireball, Revivify. Of course, Fireball, it's the fire spell of the game. But then Revivify, not on the sorcery list, gives this caster an additional job in the party. Before, as a sorcerer, he was a controller, buffer, and damage dealer. But the Phoenix Sorcerer becomes a resurrectionist. And the way 5e healing works, that's all you really need. Don't heal anyone, just bring them back to life at the end of the battle. At 7th, there's Death Ward for the life and death element of the class, and to go with it, the solid sorcery spell Wall of Fire. And then at 9th, Immolation and Reincarnate. Immolation fills in the fire need, and as it isn't one of the best fire spells, it's nice that the Phoenix Sorcerer is getting it for free. Reincarnate, which is also on the Devil's list for the Wild Sorcerer, is the perfect cap to this subclass, the ultimate rebirth spell, creating a new body for the recently deceased that is fresh and perhaps a little different. Now, the subclass already had some flavor, but adding these 11 spells gives it an identity and gives it another job, giving it something else to do than just shoot things. With these added spells, I really like this class. It offers lots of opportunities for fun play. I find the comparison between these two fire classes really highlights what makes a subclass good And what makes one poor? Oh, okay, on to the others. I'll try to cover them quicker. But stone sorcery is awkward. The description makes a subclass a combination of earth magic powdered over generic melee defender. Once we look at the features, it's clear that the earth stuff is just the flavor text. This is just a magical warrior, and every successful playtest build I've heard of included haste and twinning blooming blade, which is no longer allowed. However, it's the flavor text that defines a subclass, so it's the flavor text that will influence the devil's choice for spells. But that's not the awkward matter. The class already has an extended list of 9 spells. 4 first level ones, 2 second, 2 third, and 1 fourth. All of them taken from the paladin list, and most of them smites. They have no unifying flavor besides magic warrior hit things, and as most are concentration, they interfere with the haste build. The devil has decided to dump most of them. Hell, no paladin would take them all, retaining only Thunderous Smite and Magic Weapon, and then adding all the earth magic spells available, except a few spare third level ones that wouldn't fit on the list, giving us Earth Tremor, Thunderous Smite, Mold Earth, Magic Weapon, Maximilian's Earthen Grasp, Erupting Earth, Wall of Sand, Stone Shape, Stone Skin, Transmute Rock, Wall of Stone. It's a mixture of sorcery and non-sorcery, including support, control, and damage spells. They are certainly not enough to make this subclass viable in a competitive game, but they'll make it more enjoyable in a friendly one. See sorcery I can get through faster, as the design feels like a first draft. It's fun and kind of goofy, but needs more development. The description just generally refers to water, not seas or great depths or tentacles or storms, and nothing with acid. The mechanics are mostly defensive, except for the first, which adds conditions to cold damage and extra damage to lightning spells, and then water breathing. So with what we have to work with, that means spells that directly refer to water, and then cold next if there's no other option. I'd love to add in some other factor, particularly healing. Water is in the body, after all. But that would be homebrewing my own class. So for what we've got, the devil says, create or destroy water, fog cloud, shape water, locate animals or plants, because there's nothing else at this point, and those both have water in them. Snillock Snowball Swarm, Tidal Wave, Wall of Water, Control Water, Watery Sphere, Cone of Cold, Maelstrom. 4 non-sorcery spells and most of the water spells in the game. It's not a great list, but as good as you can make without some radical changes to the class, which would be my choice, but if you want to try the class as it is, try these spells. Which leaves only Giant Soul, and I'm afraid I'm going to leave that as is. Like other Unearthed Arcana sorcery subclasses, it's in need of reworking, though playable in a friendly game and more coherent and consistent than the last 2. The problem for adding spells is that it already has some, 2 leveled and 1 cantrip for each of the 6 giant types. These spells make up most of the first level feature and define the 6th level one, where different things happen depending on what spell you cast. Adding 10 spells, or would it be 7 or 48, would require a major rewrite of the subclass. And while I'm game to do that, that's for another time. The takeaway from today is that a properly designed subclass requires both consistency and versatility while taking into account the base class, and that 10 properly chosen spells can make a reasonably designed class more exciting, more interesting, and open up all kinds of role-playing opportunities. I highly recommend using the Phoenix subclass with the spells I suggested in your game. That's it for now. Next time, I promise we'll be on to another topic. So, please like and subscribe. Keep playing D&D. And remember, I've heard heroin's a lot of fun. Give it a shot.